Black Op Radio presents 50 Reasons for 50 Years. Why the Warren Commission may be the greatest fraud perpetrated on the American public. Now your host, Len Osanek.
Summer 1963. At a time when the CIA and FBI had targeted pro-Castro groups, Lee Oswald arrives in New Orleans to start a chapter of the Fair Play for Cuba Committee. He told the press he was the treasurer, but in fact he was the only member of that chapter. Author Joan Mellen researched Lee's activities in the summer of 1963 in New Orleans.
This is Joan Mellen, author of A Farewell to Justice, and most recently, Our Man in Haiti, George de Mohrenschildt and the CIA in the Nightmare Republic. Oswald's attempts to present himself as a member of the Fair Play for Cuba Committee in New Orleans during the summer of 1963 coincided with joint efforts by CIA and the FBI to infiltrate that organization. While Oswald was distributing leaflets in support of Fidel Castro and his government, he was openly associating not only with anti-Castro Cubans, but also with CIA operatives, whose politics were, of course, the diametrical opposite of those of Fair Play for Cuba.
In your work with the Fair Play for Cuba Committee, what are you advocating?
We advocate restoration of diplomatic, trade, and tourist relations with Cuba.
CIA's infiltration of Fair Play for Cuba was masterminded by David Atlee Phillips. Phillips' strategy was to enlist, in his words, appropriate cutouts to plant deceptive information which might embarrass the Fair Play for Cuba Committee in areas where it does have some support abroad. By handing out those leaflets and presenting himself as a leader of the Fair Play for Cuba branch in New Orleans, Oswald, who was its sole member, functioned as a CIA cutout. Oswald spent his time with several intelligence components. He was on the payroll of the FBI. His handler was that shrewd special agent Warren de Bruys. Oswald's CIA handlers were CIA contract pilot David Ferry and Clay Shaw. Not least, Oswald was observed by, among others, bar owner Orestes Peña, who saw Oswald in the frequent company of officers attached to U.S. Customs. That the Peña interview with the Church Committee remains suppressed is testament to the explosive nature of any exposure of Oswald's intelligence connections. In his capacity as a plant in a fake Fair Play for Cuba committee, Oswald functioned on behalf of CIA, the FBI, and U.S. Customs simultaneously. His public role rendered him the perfect patsy for the assassination planners who killed John F. Kennedy. Shortly after Warren de Bruys told anti-Castro activist Carlos Brinier, "I can infiltrate your organization and find out what you're doing here anytime," Oswald first appeared at Brinier's New Orleans store. Brinier's contact with Oswald in New Orleans belongs to Phillips' strategy of manipulation of the young members of the DRE into a connection with the agency's asset, Oswald. In the summer of 1963, a clearly staged incident, Carlos Brinier expressed outrage, anger, and surprise at discovering that Lee Oswald, who had volunteered for the anti-Castro cause, was handing out Fair Play for Cuba leaflets on Canal Street. A scuffle ensued, as intended, creating a public identity for Oswald as a Fidel Castro supporter. Oswald wrote about the incident in a letter to V.T. Lee of the Fair Play for Cuba Committee, postmarked 5 days before his confrontation with Brinier. The event had yet to occur. At the same time that Oswald was handing out pro-Castro leaflets and presenting himself as a member of the Fair Play for Cuba Committee, he was observed frequently at the office of CIA asset and former FBI special agent in charge in Chicago, Guy Bannister. Oswald even had Bannister's address, 544 Camp Street, stamped on some of the leaflets. It was a careless operation, indicative of the confidence with which CIA assumed it could control the media.
Stay tuned for the next installment as we expose week after week 50 lies the Warren Commission would like you to believe.